Hello everyone, welcome to Little Fantasy. I'm Zach, and you're watching another amazing book review. Now, today we're going to be talking about a book that actually, I guess is on my shelf, but not really. Today we're going to be talking all about Ready Player 2 by Ernest Cline. Now, Ready Player 1, it's on my shelf. I actually have a copy of it. I actually read this one digitally while during Thanksgiving, and it is a book that, I guess I should preface this by saying that Ready Player 1 for me is a guilty pleasures type of book. Like, I'll read it every year. I don't know why I read it every year. A lot of it has to do with, I think, the themes and a lot of the stuff when it comes to the online gaming and the whole Oasis portions of the book for me really resonated as a person, as a product of Xbox Live during Modern Warfare 2, as well as having a lot of friends that were online only friends. The book kind of resonates with me in that way, so maybe that's like the highest theme of it, because it ain't no Shakespeare. And the book's kind of, it's a YA novel, and it has some highlights, it has some flaws. So, we're going to be talking about the sequel. Now, this sequel is so acclaimed that when I said that, hey, I'm going to be reviewing this book, people were texting me and tweeting me like, wait, there's a sequel to Ready Player 2? And I have to say, yes. Yes, there is. So, why don't we kick into the review? First, I'll do more of a non-spoilery approach to it, but then we'll go into more of the spoilery stuff because of all the references and kind of all the themes and the characters. But if I'm going to do this right, I got to do it the way that Ernest Cline intended me to do this. I got to step into the Oasis. Here we go. Wow, I'm in the Oasis. I can't believe that $10 Goodwill VR headset totally worked. I'm like plugged in. Oh man, this is rad. I'm actually at Joe Exotic Zoo. Yeah, I don't know why I'm here. I think maybe because of the shirt. I guess it's what you're thinking about the most. Yay. Why don't we change this? Yeah, that's more like it, everyone. So today we're going to be talking all about Ready Player 2 by Ernest Cline. Now, this is a book that I would say it's highly anticipated, but the second I put out that I'm going to be doing a review for this, people were like scratching their heads and were like, wait, there's a sequel? And yeah, there's a sequel to this book, otherwise I don't know what dimension I'm in right now. But yes, it is a highly anticipated sequel to, I guess, a beloved YA novel. I like it because it's a guilty pleasure book for me, for many, many reasons, which I'll get into. But when it comes to this book, I would call it, the best way to describe it without getting into super spoilers, because we're going to be getting into that very soon, is if I wanted to make the pull quote, it's a lot like, again, The Matrix meets Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which is the actual pull quote for the first book, but it's like Sword Art Online meets The Great Glass Elevator, you know, the forgotten sequel to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Yeah, that's what this kind of feels like. Now, the basic premise of this is that Wade Watts has won the contest and things are normal for the first 15-20 minutes when he discovers a new piece of technology that will revolutionize the Oasis and everyone that has feelings and experiences within it. And a couple years go by, as well as a new Easter egg is uncovered, but it's not that important. But things start to escalate when it turns out the new technology that they have might be really deadly to everyone. It's a race against time to figure out what's the best way to solve this problem, but at the same time they have to solve a new Easter egg, or the fate of the whole world and millions of people's lives might be at risk of having their brains exploded. Now, on the surface, this book kind of feels like the original book a little bit. I guess the best way to put it, if I'm going to use like an 80s reference here, is it's the new Coke of Ready Player 1. It kind of tastes like it a little bit if you like really concentrate, but it isn't. It's like a little funky and weird. And that's kind of what I felt like when I was reading this book. The book isn't that long, but I feel like my main issue with the book is actually the pacing. The book starts off very strong, but then slowly starts decaying a little bit. And it falls a little bit into the Matrix to Matrix 2 of de-leveling and de-escalating, but also trying to raise the stakes at the same time, with Parzival being a god, but how do you get rid of that? But also at the same time how they have human problems and the lessons. And it's a book that, for me, if I want like my honest opinion about it, it's very middle of the road. It depends on the hour that I'm talking about it. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, okay, I liked it. No, it's not that good. And that kept happening every time I was reading the book. And that was almost a little bit of a problem because For me, what I liked about the book is that it kind of is the continuation. I still get to follow these characters, but at the same time, things have to change, and they do change, but at the same time, Ernest Cline takes his approach of writing this book by taking all the criticisms of Ready Player One and putting him in this book to the point of where there's now probably going to be new criticisms about how he writes his books, because in the original one, he would explain every reference like in painful detail to the point of where it's almost ad nauseum, whereas in this book, he'll only explain some of the references to the obscure ones, but for the most part, it's more like, well, everyone have fun. And sometimes I was like scratching my head because there are moments in this book where there's supposed to be references to things like, oh, you should really know about this, but I'm not going to explain it all that much. And that became kind of a recurring problem throughout the book. Another concern I had about this book was actually how the characters are written, because they're written in a way in the first book, by the end, they've all learned their lessons, they've all had this big arc, and now they kind of falter, which, you know, is appropriate, like especially if this is going off movie formula where the sequel is, you know, they're all the band is together, they're good, now they're gonna have this new conflict. Whereas when it comes to this book, they do have that, but at the same time, the faltering is very inconsistent because sometimes they like each other, sometimes they hate each other, and at the end of the day, the new characters were more interesting than the old characters a little bit, and that kind of felt like a little bit of a problem. The conflict in this book, oh man, it's all over the place. I feel like that's the problem. This book has stakes, but they feel artificial, like they need to be there to get the characters to go on this adventure. But at the same time, I'm not invested in the stakes whatsoever, except for the Easter egg portions. We were uncovering a new mystery of clues and stuff, and for me, that's the hardest part. Though the one thing that I really enjoyed about this book is the concept of this Oni headset that Wade finds that the original creator of the Oasis gave, where it's, you know, you plug yourself into the Oasis and you have your own thoughts and feelings. You can, you know, be other people, but at the same time, you're like, your brain is linked to the Oasis, so you can smell things, you can feel things, you can experience things. And I really enjoyed that. I think Ernest Cline does a really good job at world building those certain things, but when it comes to other things, when it comes to world building, in this book, it's very lackadaisical, because in the first book you try to fall in love with the Oasis, why people love it, why people want to stay in here, rather than in this book, everyone stays in there because now they can like boink each other without having to go outside and experience things. And it becomes less a book about the dangers of, you know, being online and having social interactions through online gaming and not living in the real world rather than in a virtual one. Whereas this book is more about thinking about empathy. It's all about understanding your fellow person. And that's kind of the message of the book, kind of flip-flops a little bit. But that is kind of the main one. Rather than, I thought the beginning of this book is like, oh, social media is bad, don't do the social interactions, but it becomes more a story about empathy and understanding, both from the villain's piece, but also from Wade Watts' piece, but also everyone in the Oasis. And I found that to be interesting, but I can't really talk about it without spoiling it. So why don't I get into the spoiler section? So there's going to be a big old thing right here if you don't want to stick to this, because I did have a lot of problems, and a lot of it has to do with this book does feel like a giant house of cards. You stack them up, you stack them up, you stack them up, but by the end, it's only held up by sheer determination, but when we start to think about things, it comes crashing down a little bit. So if you don't want to watch the second part, don't watch it. But right now, I need to do something because I really got to go to the restroom. Oh man, this thing is heavy. Oh man, you're going to need like a neck brace. Oh man. But that is my non-spoiler review for Ready Player 2. It has some good moments, it has some bad moments. I waver quite a bit. And that's one of those things, it's not the perfect book, but it's also just a middle-of-the-road book. I think it's more boring and aggravating. Though, before I get to the spoiler section of it, I just have to make this preference, and this is my mantra no matter what I do, is I'm going to be trying hard to review the book that we got rather than the book that I wish that I got. Because this book has a lot of missed opportunities, and we're going to get to that. So why don't we get back into the Oasis? Come with me, and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. And we're back. Wow, I can't believe I'm in Back to the Future. Actually, I'm in the Eric Stoltz version of it that was painfully recreated by a bunch of nerds who love Back to the Future but want to experience it the exact same way, just with a different actor. Yes. So now we are doing the spoiler section of this book. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is how James Halliday is the villain. There's a lot of, it's kind of hard to explain because he's the villain, but at the same time he's not the same person, is that James Halliday in this book scanned his brain with the Oni headset, and he's made almost an AI version of himself that's gone a little haywire. He's rigged everyone with these Oni headsets that have logged on. The brains are going to explode in 12 hours. It's up to Wade Watts and his friends to solve the problem. And this is where the book kind of fell apart, because this book has stakes like that, like millions of lives, but at the same time, it's not interesting. I think the reason why is the stakes are so kind of high that it becomes, okay, when you're reading this book, you're like, dang, I already know they're gonna get to the 11th hour, they have to get everything, rather than letting this book settle. If we look at the first book, I loved how the first book structured because there's time. The second you were on a countdown at 12 hours, you're like going like this, like you have to keep moving. But at the same time in this book, they make it explicitly clear, in 12 hours, your brain's gonna fry. No one really, can go past that. But all the characters in this book spend so much time talking and doing things other than looking for the quest that your logical thing is, your brains are gonna fry, guys. You guys gotta look for that Easter egg. And I found that to be a little hard to get into this book because you have that time limit. Time limits are really good near the end of the book, but when it comes to this, there's no lull periods where you can explore the world compared to the first book, where that contest took years, months between finding certain keys, and you got to understand Parzival, Artemis, H, Shoto, and Daito in many interesting and fun ways. Whereas when it comes to this book, it's a move, and you don't have moments to actually breathe and experience the Oasis the exact same way. It's almost like it deters people from really reading the book because you're not having this world building, which I'm a world building type of person, so maybe this might be my problem. But being able to breathe and have those little periods does work, but here, it's so on the rose. Actually, it reminds me a lot of like movies where there's a bomb ticking, they have 30 seconds left, but then the movie cuts to other people and they cut back to the bomb and it's still got like 29 seconds left, like a second has only gone by. And that's what it kind of felt like. It felt like a fake conflict, and I had a hard time with that. Now, what did I think about the characters in this? I really kind of like them a lot. I feel like they kind of grown. They're a lot like the end of the first book and kind of growing into the second book. But at the same time, there was just something missing there, I think, because there's the 5-year time skip, and we don't really get to know them as much because we have this time limit where you're just like, I gotta go everywhere, gotta do everything. You can't have times to actually find out who the people are compared to the first book, where there's this lull period where you get to understand Artemis, you get to understand H, you get to understand Shoto and Daito, and you get to understand Wade Watts. Now you kind of get that, but you get it from Wade's perspective. And at times, it doesn't seem correct. It kind of seems a little artificial because, again, you have them here like, okay, this is what's happening. We're growing up. Some of us are having kids. Some of us are broken up. Some of us are getting married. But you never have those moments where you have that nice lull period where they meet up and just talk about their lives like in the first book. Whereas here, it's, again, a race against time. You do kind of have that in the beginning of the story. But once the whole contest gets kicked off, you start having like this race against time. And when some of them are getting picked off, like Shoto and H, I didn't really care all that much, if that makes any sense, because my emotional attachment to them wasn't as emotional attachment as when they die in the first book with the huge bomb. Like, oh no, who's going to win the contest? Because you knew kind of that the thing was going to be resolved, because you can't have millions of lives at stake and fail unless this is going to be a pessimistic story that goes into Ready Player 3. It's almost like having Infinity War to Avengers Endgame, where Infinity War ends so pessimistically, but you knew that there was going to be Endgame that was going to fix all the mistakes. And that's something that I kind of noticed, especially when it comes to this book, is that this is the part of the story that I actually thought was the most interesting, was almost that conflict between James Halliday, Ogden Morrow, and Kira. Is you see these moments, actually, every time Parzival gets one of the little shards, because the whole point of this is understanding empathy and understanding why James Halliday had a very unhealthy relationship with her because he was obsessed. But you see those moments, you see why she was who she was, and kind of like the moral dilemma of he scanned her brain, is she alive or is she just, ones and zeros in this Oasis? And for me, I thought that was an interesting conflict, but it falls apart once again because I think the reason why I wasn't invested into it was because it's not really a contest, it's like a fake contest, because in the rules, only two people, Ogden Morrow and Wade Watts, who are technically the heir, are the only two people that can go on this. So why is there even a scoreboard? Why are there even stakes when it comes to that? Because they talk about it, then they drop it really quickly, only there for like, remember this from the first movie and the first book? Yeah, you guys remember, that's awesome. But that's the thing, that's the hard part about it is that it doesn't necessarily need to be that type of story. It doesn't have to be a contest. It can be a race against time to find an even hidden Easter egg. That's the word I'm going to use. Hidden Easter egg, yeah. That's in there without having to have it as the big contest, because that was only there to be there.
Now, what about the challenges? Because here I'm in the Oasis right now. I'm actually listening to Huey Lewis in the News perform live. Yeah, it's actually kind of cool. Wow. Yeah. But when it comes to the challenges in the story, they're not fun. What I mean by that is, I think Ernest Cline took a lot of his criticisms from Ready Player One and then kind of mushed them into this book where people are like, okay, you over-explain every little reference to the point of nauseum. Like, did you know this about the internet, or did you know this about this coin-operated machine? Because we used to use coins, rather than in this book, Wade doesn't explain really any of the references, and if he does, it's very baseline. And this becomes a serious issue throughout the book, especially after the first trial, which is a video game, which people don't really necessarily know about. But then you get into like the John Hughes stuff, and he kinds to explain a little bit of it, but not enough where you're like, oh, okay, what's going on? It's like very baseline. But the second you get to the Prince planet, there's a whole part where he has to fight different versions of Prince. This is where the book was kind of losing me, because I don't know anything about Prince. And the way that Ernest Cline was describing things, like he's only doing it very baseline rather than, okay, here's the person, this is what's happening. I think that also has to do with the whole, you have this time thing, but at the same time, I felt really distracted. There weren't as many references as in the first book, where every sentence is a reference to something, whereas in this book, there are the references, though at the same time, you don't necessarily get them all. And that's kind of the thing when it comes down to the story is that it's kind of taking all the criticism of Ready Player One up here and kind of doing the right without doing it the wrong way a little bit, because sometimes having those references, sometimes having those explanations, especially with really obscure stuff, does help. I mean, some of my favorite ones was the stuff like the Captain Crunch whistle, and even the stuff with like war games and kind of explaining those little references to the minor stuff does actually work and does have a nice payoff to it. Though when it comes to this story, even like the little Middle Earth stuff, it didn't quite work in the way of like you're explaining it through the first age. Everyone knows the third age with Frodo and Bilbo and everyone. And it kind of got to the point of where you're listening to this because it's all about the Silmarillion. And the Silmarillion's just a Bible. I've read it. It's actually, I can't see right now. I got the Oasis on me. But I pulled up my whole fantasy library in the Oasis up here. It's a freaking Bible of just being confusing and having those little moments of maybe even Ernest Cline kind of explaining a little bit of those things would have helped. And that became a distracting factor in the book, was that. Like, you have like this baseline explanation of a lot of things, especially when the audience you're trying to go for is teenagers and young adults who are not necessarily well versed in that type of obscure stuff, because some people that I've talked to don't even know what a vine is anymore. Yeah, so sometimes you have to do that. Though, did it affect the story? Did I like the challenges? Yeah, they were actually kind of fun, like, individually, except for maybe the Prince one, because I'm not really well versed in Prince. I think I saw Purple Rain once in theaters after he died, because I went with some friends. But compared to the first book, where it's like really wacky, like super 80s, I like that he took a different approach, and it isn't just all 80s references. It's more references from all over the place, from the 70s to the 80s to Middle Earth to even John Hughes movies. They're kind of set between the 70s to about the 90s, and I like that type of stuff. I like how it isn't leaning into the 80s pop culture anymore. It's going more into world culture up until about 2016, I guess, because they do like Sword Art Online stuff. So you're getting different verses, you're getting different themes, and I like that type of stuff quite a lot.
One of the things I really thought that was really off the mark about this book is I think one of the main messages, other than empathy, is there's this underlining message about you shouldn't be hero worshipping. You shouldn't be, you should look up to your heroes, but stay back because they're going to be problematic in some way, shape, or form, and you shouldn't hoist them up because they're going to fall down 10 times harder. And we see this throughout the book with James Halliday, who's super creepy with Ogden Morrow's wife, and the whole thing is teaching everyone a lesson about not being creepy and understanding empathy of like, okay, I fell in love with you for the wrong reasons, and now that I can experience it through your eyes, through your perspective, you don't have to do it. But the message kind of comes off a little hypocritical because it's supposed to be the message that you're supposed to hold these people accountable, but Wade Watts, Parzival, does all this horrible stuff in the book. If I break it down, he invades people's privacy. He pretty much like doxes people, or he kills people and pretty much lies in court. Other things that he does is he stalks people. He's kind of creepy with Artemis in this book again. Something that was in the first book, but here he kind of watches her and tracks her in many ways. A lot of invasion of privacy, but by the end of the story, he's not held accountable whatsoever, and there's never a moment where he even has moments where there's fans of him that are hero worshiping him. And I found this to be a kind of a, again, flip-floppy thing where you hold certain people accountable, but your main character, don't have to be held accountable, which I had a hard time relating to. And that's one of the hardest parts about this book is you have that theme, which is drilled again and again and again, especially within each challenge, where when they bring up a creator, there's always like paragraphs where they'll explain something problematic about them, which if you just look at the book that way, it feels like it's an addition they had in the second or third draft to really hammer in the point. And don't get me wrong, you shouldn't hero worship. I think that's something that is something that people don't really talk about all that much. And it's something that Ernest Cline obviously is very passionate about because he brings it up a lot in this book. It's something that was probably on his mind. The way that he does it in this book really like hits the nail on the head. It's almost not pandering, but it's written in a way that's supposed to be blatantly obvious, to the point of where Wade Watts at the end of the book has like a little speech about it, and you could just have it underlined and kind of talk about it, and really talk about it even from a person like Wade Watts, who's now the most famous person in the Oasis, and how he has to live with these pressures now. If everything he talks about, everything he says, everything he does can be taken out of context or does all the stuff, but the message is more about that creepy guy, the creator. Don't hang out with him. He's really weird. And that's something that really kind of bothered me a little bit. And overall, would I recommend this book? Again, it's like the Great Glass Elevator. You can read it if you want to, but if you liked Ready Player One, just stick to Ready Player One. But if you want a continuation, that's the best way to really do this book. Is it's almost, choose your own adventure. Do you want the continuation of the story or not?
Now, the biggest problem that I had with the story is actually the world building. Comparing it to Ready Player One, Ernest Cline does an amazing job when it comes to world building and explaining his universe and his technology. But in this story, you get really none of that. You get more of the Oni stuff. Like, oh, we have this headset now. You can have thoughts and feelings and really feel everything in the Oasis. But that takes away from the magic a little bit. And what I mean by that is the stakes are like raised because everyone's kind of in reality where they can feel pain and they can experience love in many different ways. But at the same time, it feels less of a video game and more like you're browsing Twitter now. And it's like less magical because in the first book, he would explain almost the lull periods of like, we're going to go to a Goonies planet. We're going to go here. We're going to go there. And it felt more like an adventure in a video game compared to this book, which is a race against time. So you don't have a chance to really have like the baseline of understanding the Oasis or finding new things. There are like little moments of explaining things like the void and, there's these planets you can go to. But for the most part, it's not like that. I mean, there's also like the education planet. Like, I like that type of stuff because you have those moments of really exploring what a society that had video game VR technology would actually experience in that way. And I thought that stuff was great. But at the same time, all the stuff like about AI and all the stuff about like a spaceship, the Arcadia was not fun because it was fun as a joke in the first book, but when it's actually like reality, it's real weird. And by the end of it, You knew something was going to happen with that spaceship. You knew stuff was going to happen. And by the end, I was just very indifferent on a lot of that stuff with the world building because I'm a world building person, not a magic system person. Being able to like live and breathe in that world, I think Ernest Cline does a really good job with. The silver lining with this is I like the stuff with the Oni, like being able to have empathy, being able to like surf, being able to experience people's thoughts and feelings in a different way. I thought was cool, but it wasn't done enough. I mean, yes, you have the stuff like Kira, but that was kind of the problem, isn't it? Where you only have it through Kira's perspective. I would have loved it if you had like a section with even with Artemis a little bit, even though she doesn't wear it, where you have it from perspective of people that view Wade Watts from a different angle, where Wade sees like himself as a reflection, like, oh my god, I'm turning slowly into Halliday in this way. But he's seeing it through his friend's eyes who use the Oni, or using it through a different perspective. Like the Kira stuff was the most fascinating because you're seeing it through her eyes, you're getting it through her experiences. But at the same time, Wade doesn't really experience all that much, and I found that to be a problem.
Now the real question is there going to be a sequel to this book? Is there going to be a Ready Player 3? I don't know. That's kind of the thing. The book kind of ends off in a happy note where Kira is basically made conscious again because they decide we're going to give her life in the Oasis. We get the same thing with Ogdemar, who dies in the book, but he gets resurrected this way. Wade Watts, Artemis, and all the gang kind of put on Oni headsets and scan their brains and put themselves into the Oasis and shoot them off into a rocket ship that throughout this narrative Wade Watts has been building. And it kind of ends off on, well, now we have two branching narratives. You can follow the Oasis crew as they float off thousands of light years away to the nearest new planet to have all these embryos and rebuild society, or you can stay with the old gang on this dying Earth where Wade Watts is becoming a dad, everyone's moving on. Though, if I wanted one thing from this book, I feel like if they're going to do another one, it can't be from the perspective. I'd almost like it to be almost The Force Awakens or like a soft reboot, where you have a different context. You show the generational gap a little bit, because they were kind of going with this in the beginning of this, because they were talking a lot about the new generation of Gunters looking for the Easter egg are almost like Gen Zers in a way, and people don't understand them. But at the same time, I think it would benefit if they did it almost another contest. Wade Watts is about to die and he has to find a successor. It becomes a generational thing about, should we keep doing this? Because there's the new, they never push the button. There's a giant red button. They talk about it, but they never do it. And if there's a third book, will I read it? I think time will tell. I don't think I'm going to read it at launch. That's the thing. I feel like this is a book that, wait until it's down in price to about $9.99 or $10, or if it's on Kindle for $3.99, get it. But for the most part, it's a middle of the road type of book, and I'm probably never going to reread this book again, same as how Wade Watts at the end of this is like, I never went to the Oasis ever again. But that's kind of my review. So why don't we go back to reality for a little bit?
And that was Ready Player 2 by Ernest Cline. Wasn't my favorite book. It was universally bad, but it did have some silver linings. Though, is it a book that I'll ever read again? Probably not. If there's going to be a Ready Player 3, will I read it? What did you all think of this book? Did you read it? Have you read Ready Player 1? What are some of your favorite references, things that you enjoyed about it? Maybe some messages of the book that you liked? Well, I'd love to hear that all. Let's keep these conversations going on YouTube. I really love reading comments and responding. If you really liked this video, maybe consider giving it a thumbs up or a big ol' subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. Well, thank you all so much. Like always, may your food and drink ever be tasteful, and may your books be filled with fantasy and adventure. Well, everyone, see ya. Well, maybe I should go back into the Oasis. Maybe there might be some more fantasy books or things of adventure that we can go on. Well, everyone, I'm going back. See ya, everyone. Bye. Okay, now this is over. I don't look ridiculous, right?